Today, we strip away the fiction, rely solely on authoritative historical records, from records of the grand historian and modern archaeological evidence, and uncover the cold, unvarnished truth behind one of ancient China's most infamous and misunderstood events. This is not a story of mindless barbarism. It is a story of imperial power, ideological warfare, political betrayal, and the dangerous art of rewriting history to control how the world remembers a ruler and an empire. Let us start with the first act, burning books, which took place in the 34th year of Qin Shi Huang's reign, 213 BC. The Qin had unified the warring states just 80 years earlier, ending centuries of chaos that had torn China apart. But unity was fragile. The empire's greatest threat was not foreign invaders or rebellious warlords, it was ideological division. At a lavish royal banquet, a Confucian scholar named Chun Yu stood before the emperor and dared to challenge the very foundation of Qin rule, the centralized commandery system. Chun Yu argued that the Qin should restore the ancient feudal system, enfeoffing royal relatives and nobles to stabilize the realm, just as the Zhou dynasty had done for centuries. This was not a harmless academic debate. For Qin Shi Huang and his chief minister Li Si, a staunch legalist, this was an act of sedition. To revive feudalism was to undo the unification they had fought so hard to achieve, to return China to the cycle of endless war. Li Si, a master of political calculation, saw this moment as a chance to crush ideological dissent once and for all. He stepped forward and delivered a ruthless, precise proposal that would become the Edict of Burning Books. Li Si's edict was not a random order to burn every book in China, a lie that has persisted for centuries. The edict was highly targeted, with strict, specific rules that reveal its true purpose: ideological control, not cultural annihilation. First, all historical records, not written by the Qing court, were to be burned, to eliminate narratives that praised feudal states and criticized Qin rule. Second, any private collection of the Book of Songs, the Book of Documents, and the writings of other philosophical schools was to be surrendered to local officials and burned within 30 days. Those who refused would be branded and sent to labor on the Great Wall as convicts. Third, anyone caught discussing the Book of Songs or the Book of Documents in public would be executed in the marketplace, and anyone who used ancient ideals to criticize the current government would be executed along with their entire family. Crucially, 3 categories of books were completely spared: books on medicine, divination, and agriculture, practical texts that served the people and the state. Most importantly, the imperial library, under the supervision of court scholars, kept full intact copies of all banned texts. The fire was for private collections, not for destroying knowledge itself. This was a political purge of ideas that threatened the Qin's centralized power, not a war on civilization. The Qin did not seek to erase culture. They sought to unify it under a single state-approved ideology to hold their fragile empire together. 1 year later, in 212 BC, the second event unfolded: the incident, long mislabeled, burying scholars. This act had nothing to do with Confucian scholars, nothing to do with suppressing philosophy, and everything to do with betrayal, fraud, and the emperor's desperate quest for immortality. Qin Shi Huang, like many powerful rulers of ancient times, was obsessed with living forever. He poured massive amounts of gold, silver, and resources into hiring alchemists and fangshi men who claimed they could find the elixir of immortality hidden in distant mountains or mythical islands. 2 of these men, Lu Sheng and Hu Sheng, were among the most trusted and rewarded. They received lavish gifts, imperial favor, and unlimited funding to fulfill their promise. But they knew the truth: there was no elixir. They could not deliver what they had promised, and they feared the emperor's wrath when their fraud was exposed. So they made a fateful decision. They stole the imperial funds, fled Xianyang in secret, and before they left, they spread vicious rumors across the capital. They called Qin Shi Huang cruel, arrogant, power-hungry, and unfit to rule, claiming his tyranny made it impossible to find the elixir of immortality. When Qin Shi Huang heard of their betrayal, his rage was unparalleled. He had lavished wealth and respect on these men, only to be robbed, defamed, and abandoned. The emperor saw this, not just as a personal insult, but as a threat to his authority. If liars and schemers could spread lies about him without punishment, no ruler could maintain order. He immediately ordered imperial censors to arrest and interrogate all alchemists, fangshi, and associated scholars in Xianyang who were linked to the immortality quest. Under interrogation, these men accused one another to save themselves, creating a chain of denunciations. In the end, 460 people were found guilty of fraud, spreading seditious rumors, and defaming the emperor. These 460 were not innocent Confucian scholars who loved Confucius and taught ancient wisdom. They were, for the most part, alchemists and charlatans who had deceived the emperor, stolen from the state, and incited unrest. A small number may have been scholars caught in the dragnet, but the core group was the very men who had betrayed the emperor's trust. They were executed by burial in Xianyang as a warning to anyone who would dare to deceive or defy the Qin throne. This was a crackdown on fraud and sedition, not a massacre of intellectuals. Now, we must ask the most critical question: if the historical facts are so clear, burning books as targeted ideological control, burying scholars as a purge of fraudulent alchemists, how did this become the story of a tyrant, burning all books, and burying alive thousands of innocent Confucian scholars? The answer lies in the Han Dynasty, which replaced the Qin after its sudden collapse just a few years later, and in the rise of Confucianism as the supreme state ideology. The Han needed to legitimize its rule by painting the Qin as an evil tyrannical regime that deserved to fall. Confucian scholars who had been marginalized under the legalist Qin gained total control of historical writing under Emperor Wu of Han, when Confucianism was declared the only official philosophy. These scholars had a powerful motive to rewrite the story of burning books and burying scholars. They turned a targeted political campaign into a genocidal attack on Confucianism, transforming Qin Shi Huang from a complex unifier into a one-dimensional villain. Early Han texts, like Discourses on the Fall of Qin, merged the two separate events into a single horrific narrative, burning classics and burying scholars. Later, scholars amplified the lie, inflating numbers, inventing stories of innocent scholars being buried alive, and erasing the critical details that revealed the truth. For 2,000 years, this fictional version was taught as fact, passed down through textbooks, poems, and folktales, until the myth completely overshadowed the real history. Modern historical research and archaeological discoveries have finally shattered this myth. Bamboo slips found in Li and Yunmeng, dating back to the Qin dynasty, confirmed that the Burning Books Edict only targeted private collections of philosophical and historical texts, while practical books and imperial archives remained intact. These slips also show that Confucian teachings continued to be taught and circulated in private during the Qin dynasty, proving there was no systematic persecution of Confucian scholars. Qin Shi Huang did not hate Confucianism. He employed many Confucian scholars as court advisors to help create rituals and laws for his new empire. His conflict was not with Confucian ideas themselves, but with any ideology that challenged his centralized rule. The burying scholars incident, as recorded in Sima Qian's Records of the Grand Historian, clearly states the victims were Fangxi and literary charlatans, not Confucian scholars. Even the Han Dynasty historians could not fully erase the original truth, leaving clues that modern scholars have uncovered to restore the real story. We must also understand the historical context that shaped these decisions. The Qin was the first empire to unify China, a revolutionary experiment in governance that had no precedent. After centuries of war, the empire was torn by regional loyalties, conflicting philosophies, and deep social divisions. Qin, Shi Huang, and Li Si believed that ideological unity was the only way to prevent the empire from collapsing back into chaos. Their methods were harsh, authoritarian, and morally reprehensible by modern standards. There is no denying that burning books suppressed free thought, and that burying scholars was a brutal act of political violence. But we cannot judge ancient rulers by modern values, nor can we accept exaggerated myths as historical fact. The Qin's policies were extreme, but they were not the mindless atrocities that later generations claimed. They were calculated, desperate moves to hold a unified China together, a goal that would shape Chinese civilization for the next 2,000 years. The legacy of burning books and burying scholars is not just about what happened in 213 and 212 BC. It is a lesson about how power shapes history, how winners write the stories, and how easy it is for myth to replace truth. Qin Shi Huang remains one of history's most controversial figures, a man who built the Great Wall, standardized writing and currency, united a nation, and ruled with uncompromising brutality. He was neither a saint nor a devil, but a complex ruler, caught in the impossible task of governing a vast, newly unified empire. The myth of burning books and burying scholars has obscured his achievements, exaggerated his flaws, and turned a nuanced historical event into a simplistic morality tale. To understand the Qin dynasty, to understand ancient China, we must reject the lies and embrace the facts. We must see the events not as black and white atrocities, but as products of their time, driven by political necessity, fear, betrayal, and the eternal struggle for power. If you enjoyed this journey into ancient China, hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe for more epic history. See you next time.